Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is nutrition, and we're going to discuss learning concepts versus memorization. So this came up for kind of two reasons. One is recently I was working with one of the trainers that I help, and we were doing kind of like a review of nutrition. So they had kind of written a nutrition plan for a client, and they had some questions about it, so we were kind of talking through it. And it was a very good discussion in the sense to where part of what we were talking about in the conversation we were having was learning or figuring out a way to explain to the client why the trainer was making the changes they were making to that client's nutrition. So the client was eating in a certain manner, and it wasn't bad. It was pretty good. It would be quote unquote what most people would consider healthy. However, there were mistakes that were happening, and we wanted to the trainer in a very good way. I'm glad the trainer wanted to do this, but the trainer was wanting to not only make the corrections for that client's program, but also explain why those corrections were being made, so that way the client would understand. Now, the difficult part to this was some of the changes we were making were complex in nature, and we were trying to find the shortest, simplest way to explain it. Whenever it might have taken the trainer or myself like years to learn it, how do you sum up years of learning in like 3 sentences? And that was the challenge. But it was an awesome goal of the trainer, to want to explain it to their client. So super awesome, is fun. And what we started talking about was the need for most people to learn these things, because the client was following what they believed to be true kind of rules of nutrition. However, what they were doing didn't apply to the moment and the situation that they were in. So they were making right choices at the wrong time, if that makes sense. And that's where the concept of memorization versus learning concepts became important, because that client had memorized a fact or a bit of data, and they memorized that kind of chunk of information, but didn't memorize or didn't understand the context in which that chunk of information applied or didn't apply. And it would be better for that person to have learned the concepts of why that information was correct. So rather than just learning, like we're going to go through some examples of this through the podcast. So one of the ones I have is sometimes people will kind of memorize a rule, and it'll be something like, don't eat 3 hours before bed. Well, sometimes that's true and sometimes that's not true. So the person had memorized don't eat 3 hours before bed, and maybe whenever they were told that, they were in the life situation and the goal in which that would have been true for them. However, they might not be in that situation now. They might have different goals, they might have a different lifestyle schedule, and all of a sudden that is not actually good advice. So instead of them hearing, and memorizing, don't eat 3 hours before bed, it would be better to learn why that advice was given, and then use the concept of that advice and apply that where they need it. So that's what I wanted to go through, was to kind of emphasize to everyone, don't just memorize rules, because then you're never going to understand why that rule was created in the first place. And without that understanding, you're not going to know if that rule applies to you correctly or not, depending on which situation of the day or time or goals or whatever whatever moment you were in at that time. So, part of the temptation of memorization is it's easy. It's black or white. It's right or wrong. It's, do this or don't do that. And it's easy in the moment. It's short-term easy, but long-term hard, because it doesn't always apply to all of life situations. So we might memorize a rule in a black and white scenario, but we don't live in black and white. Life is all shades of gray. So I about made a 50 Shades of Grey reference there, but that probably would not have been correct. However, okay, so we'll get back on track here. We live in an ever-changing kind of life. So our life does not happen. One of the things I always get the OCD part of me gets bugged with in business is I don't always get to make my daily schedule where from 8 to 9 I do this, 9 to 10 I do this, 10 to 11 I do this. Life just laughs in your face when you try to make a schedule that way because it absolutely doesn't happen. I still make those schedules because I want to have a baseline that as my day varies, I know how far off I've gotten or where I need to push back to. So it's good to have like a baseline, but you have to recognize that that's not going to be followed to a T all the time. So when we memorize things that are in black and white contexts, when we get into the gray areas, all of a sudden we don't know what to do. So our black and white memorized thing doesn't quite fit now, and we're screwed because we don't know what the right choice is, and therefore we feel kind of confused or lost, or we feel kind of betrayed by the advice that we had gotten. And it's like, oh my gosh, if that's not true, what is true? And then all of the possibilities, all the what ifs in your head, all seem to have the same merit, and we get a little chaotic and we get a little anxiety over that. Because all of a sudden anything can be true, anything can be false. So it's better for us, instead of memorizing things that only apply in black and whites, is to learn the concept of things so we can apply it in the gray areas of life. Okay? And that's what I hope to do with the podcasts over all of them that we've done. So I recently just had a friend of mine reach out, and she had a newborn, and she has some time on her hands now, and she wanted to listen to some podcasts. And she was actually asking, like, where should she start? So if you're ever curious about that, by the way, nutritionally is what she was probably mostly focused on. So I told her to listen to podcast number 41, and then just use the search function on your podcast homepage, wherever you're at, listening to this to, and just type nutrition. And every podcast that was about nutrition has that tagline in it, and then you can just start from number 1 and work your way through. So, but that's where the idea of this came up. Is the idea of our podcast is to show you guys what the concepts are, not teach you a bunch of rules that you have to try to memorize that sometimes apply and sometimes don't. Is I want to explain the concept of things, so that way over time, as you listen to more and more podcasts, and as you take the knowledge learned in the podcast and apply it to your life, you can start to understand what the real reasons for everything is and how to manipulate nutrition depending on where you are in life. So I don't intend for these podcasts to be very easily learned. That might sound a little kind of counterintuitive, but I don't want to just present you guys with things to memorize. I think that would be doing a disservice to you. It gives you short-term satisfaction, but not long-term success. And screw that. I do not want to, give you guys something right away that makes you all happy and, thinking I'm a genius or whatever, and then all of a sudden it doesn't work and you think I'm a moron. But more importantly than what you think of me or don't think of me is you wouldn't have gotten the results that you really wanted. So if you're going to invest 30 minutes a podcast, I want you to walk away with stuff that you can use for the rest of your life. I want these 30 minutes to affect the next 30 years. That's my goal. So the difficult part about that is it's harder to learn these kind of concepts in the short term. However, it does lead to long-term success because, like we said, you can use the information in the gray areas of life. So be very careful of trying to digest and apply things that are like, here's top 10 rules for health. Sometimes that's helpful if the rules are conceptual, but if one of the rules is don't eat 3 hours before bed, the other rule is, carbs are bad for you, or bread is bad for you. Like, those things are too black and white. They're not correct. So sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. It's better to learn concepts. So let's go through. I picked 3, but if you guys have any more specific ones that you would like broken down in a similar style podcast, shoot us an email at brutalironjim@gmail.com, and I'll explain that one in a podcast. We'll do like kind of a myth debunking type of podcast. So first thing we have is don't eat 3 hours before bed. Let's first talk about when that's right. Okay? And typically the best time that would be correct is if you've had the right amount of food and or accidentally a surplus by the time you're 3 hours before bed. So if you go to bed at 11 and it's 8 o'clock right now, and you're like, I'm kind of hungry, or even if you're not hungry but you just kind of out of habit you would grab something to snack on, and you remember your rule, don't eat 3 hours before bed, that would actually be an appropriate rule. So if you've already had your appropriate breakfast, you had your snacks throughout the day, maybe you had a big lunch, you had a good dinner with your family, you don't really need those calories. So you've already had the appropriate amount of calories, or accidentally more, by that 3-hour mark before bed. So putting more food in your face is not going to help, because your body isn't going to be active enough to burn off that excess, because pretty much everything you would eat at that time would be excess. So unless you plan on, going and running a mile in the next 3 hours before you fall asleep, which is probably unlikely, you're going to eat those calories. The calories are going to sit around with nothing much to do, so some of them are going to get converted to body fat. So that's when don't eat 3 hours before bed is appropriate. If you come into that time frame with the right amount of calories, and anything you would eat now would be in excess, that would be unwanted, unnecessary. It's not going to help you in the long run. It's just going to make you gain weight. So that would be a good rule to apply. Now, when is that rule wrong? What happens if you got your breakfast in, you had kind of a mid-morning snack, you got lunch, you you ate a little bit of an early supper. So say normally you have like a supper at like 5, but today you had something going on, you had to kind of cram it in at 3:30. Well, all of a sudden, the last time you ate was 3:30, and now it's 8 o'clock at night. You're not going to get into bed till 11, and you're pretty hungry. And that's kind of reasonable to then eat, because from 3:30 to 8 o'clock, your body might have burned off what you ate at 3:30, and then had to burn even more. So there's a little bit of a deficit going on. So your body kind of like burned off the food, it had to burn off some stored body fat, had to kind of dip into a little bit of like cortisol stress. It kind of just like is kind of running a little bit empty. It's like an empty gas tank on fumes. So your body's saying, hey, feed me. And you'd be like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to get fat. So, but that would actually be an okay time to eat. Now, you would have to eat an appropriate amount. You can't just have a bowl of ice cream or a bottle of wine and say, Rob told me to. So the idea would be is if you're at that 3-hour mark before bed and you're at a caloric deficit for the day, okay, you're under where you should be at that time, then eating calories to fill that space would be appropriate. Now, the reason why that is helpful to know is that one night that you skipped the food, so you ate at 3:30, you skipped that dinner, and you went to bed. Now, the next day, your body wakes up in a very much larger deficit than what it was used to. So right from the get-go of the day, it's going to say, man, I am way behind. Like, we're struggling already. We don't have enough resources. The body's going to tell the brain, hey, you need to go eat more. Okay, we need more calories. So all of a sudden you eat breakfast, and the body goes, yeah, that was good, but that wasn't enough. I need more. So then all of a sudden your snack in the morning gets a little bit larger. Maybe you grab an extra pack of chips or a thing of crackers. Your body says, oh man, that was really good. That definitely helped. Hey, do you think we could get even more so that way we don't get caught behind next time? So then all of a sudden at lunch you add up a little bit more food. You have a little above what you'd really want. The body goes, man, this is freaking awesome. Like, we're getting to save a lot now. Hey, keep doing this. And now all of a sudden the whole day you feel peckish, you're kind of overeating at every little meal, and you're kind of struggling, and you're like, man, what the heck's going on today? I'm just so hungry, like I'm ruining my whole freaking day, and you get mad and you feel like a failure that day. When really what happened was the night before you didn't have enough calories, so you woke up in a deficit, your body had these cravings all day, and it's causing you to overeat. You're going to feel like a failure. Then all of a sudden at supper you're going to say, screw this, I screwed up all damn day, I'm not even going to eat supper, or I'll eat something really little. I'll punish myself for overeating during the day. When you weren't really overeating, you were trying to catch up for the night before. So now all of a sudden you skip dinner. You can see where this is going, by the way, if you're still following me. But all of a sudden you skimp out on dinner. You end up doing the same damn thing you just did the last time. So now all of a sudden you go to bed again in a deficit. But this time you're super determined not to overeat all day. So you kind of are, super willpower. You do a freaking awesome job in that third day. You don't overeat at all during the day. You eat everything you should. Everything was perfect. Now all of a sudden you're sitting there the third night and you are freaking famished. So you're so hungry. So you start ripping and tearing through the house to eat everything in sight. Okay? So that third night of eating everything in sight was because of the first night that you didn't eat enough. So it does happen like that, where it cascades up and down, swings up and down throughout the days. So making one mistake that night can kind of cause a little bit of a cascading effect over the next 2 days. So that's where a rule of don't eat 3 hours before bed, that one rule, that one little rule followed that one night in an inappropriate time can screw up the next 2 days. Now, that might seem like an extreme example to some people, but it's not. because there are a bunch of other people sitting here shaking their head going, oh yeah, yep, I've felt that before. So it does happen. So it's better for us to consider where we're at that time of night. Okay, am I coming into this night with the normal food that I should have had? If yes, then I shouldn't eat right now. If I'm behind on food, then I should eat, but I have to make sure that I eat just the right amount. So maybe I only need like half of dinner or just a normal dinner, but I don't need that dinner plus an evening snack. So instead of saying don't eat 3 hours before bed, the better way to say is to don't go to bed. You want to try to go to bed without a caloric surplus, in the sense of not overeating at night. So that's what that rule is trying to get you to do. So don't eat 3 hours before bed. What they're really trying to say is don't overeat at night. Don't have excess calories at night, and then it'll make you fat. So the rule really means don't go to bed with a caloric surplus. That's kind of what the goal is. So that was long-winded, but hopefully that was helpful to explain a little bit about why that rule memorized is right sometimes, but wrong sometimes. The next rule we have is to eat 5 meals a day, spaced 3 hours apart. Now that sounds good, especially because it has numbers. People like having numbers in there because it feels more factual and it feels more concrete of yes, I know what I'm doing, or no, I don't know what I'm doing. So eat 5 small meals a day, spaced 3 hours apart. When most people hear this, they're going to say, why is Rob saying that's a bad thing? Well, for the majority of people, the majority of the time, that's actually really good advice. It's fine advice. It's fantastic. And that's actually the way that I encourage most of my clients to eat. However, what about people with different schedules or scheduling conflicts? Okay? So if they don't have time for 5 meals a day, spaced 3 hours apart. So I work with people like nurses, teachers, cops, truck drivers, people who load and unload trucks. There's an enormous amount of other jobs. I can't think of them all right now. But there's a ton of jobs where we can't just willy-nilly start sitting down and eating a meal every 3 hours. So in those jobs, or even in other just kind of life situations, it's going to be very difficult for you to follow that rule. So you can't eat 5 meals a day, spaced 3 hours apart. You might say, well, I can eat like 4 meals a day. Is that okay? And then if you hear this rule, if I eat 5 meals a day, spaced 3 hours apart, you'll say, oh, damn, I can't do that. I'm a failure. I'm never going to get thin, or diets don't work for me, or blah, 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 blah. So it's kind of like a fatalistic, like, if I can't do it that way, I can't do it at all type feeling when you get that type of advice. So a better way of saying that, now this is going to be long-winded, so this is a warning as to why things do get simplified, is because what I'm about to say is the long-winded version of why people try to give that simplified advice. But eating smaller, more frequent meals tends to be better for blood sugar control, consistent daily energy, and it helps prevent the body from experiencing extreme deficits throughout the day, which can sometimes lead to cravings, like we talked about, and or it can lead to reduced recovery from resistance training. So if somebody has muscle damage, they want to be putting protein in the blood system consistently throughout the day to help fix that muscle damage. Whereas if they just do it in lump sums, like 6 to 8 hours apart, it's not as efficient in terms of muscle recovery. So, saying all of that, so the shortened version that's correct is eat smaller, more frequent meals, tends to be better for blood sugar control, consistent daily energy, and for preventing the body from experiencing extreme deficits which can lead to cravings and or reduce recovery from resistance training. So when people say eat 5 small meals a day, spaced 3 hours apart, they're trying to say all of that other stuff summed up. The downside is people take it literally. They're going to literally think they have to have 5 meals a day. They're going to literally think they have to eat every 3 hours. And if they can't do either one of those parameters, they're going to feel like they failed. When it's not true. You just have to eat smaller, more frequent meals. So if right now, or like say your schedule could allow you to eat just 2 huge meals. Say 1 breakfast, 1 supper, and that's it. Well, that okay. But if your schedule allows you to space those same calories over 3 or 4 meals, you're going to actually feel better throughout the day, have better blood sugar control, better muscle recovery, you're going to prevent cravings as much. So if you have the opportunity to spread your meals out more, that's the better way to go. So maybe you can only spread yours out to 4. That doesn't mean you're a failure. 5 is not so magical number. The real concept is just to spread your calories out. So that's the better thing to learn. The concept of eating smaller, more frequent meals, and why that's helpful. That is more important to learn than memorizing a rule of eating 5 meals a day, because that doesn't work for some people, and that doesn't fit into some people's lifestyles. So rather than them saying, oh, I guess I can never be healthy, and then just giving up on all structure whatsoever, they could just do as many frequent meals as they could, as small as they need to space their calories out. So maybe 3 is the best they can do schedule-wise. Well, 3 is still better than 2. So that's still a good option. So that's the idea. The last one we're going to cover here, because we're already getting a little long, is such and such food is bad for you. So, bread is bad for you, or potatoes are bad for you, or carbs are bad for you, or fats are bad for you, or sugars are bad for you. So if there's any, this specific thing is bad for you statement. That's absolutely not true. Okay? Now, when is it true? It might be true in certain medical conditions. So if I'm lactose intolerant and I drink milk, I will be unhappy. So milk is bad for you if you're lactose intolerant. That is just true. So certain medical conditions are going to require that you avoid specific foods. And there's way too many of them for me to get into, so sorry, we'll have to save that for some other podcast if you're interested. But there are conditions where certain specific foods need to be monitored and or completely eliminated, depending on what the case is. Okay? Then also think of emotional trigger foods. So if somebody, say that every time they have chocolate, they just kind of lose their shit and they end up eating everything under the sun and go nuts every day. So we would probably want to avoid chocolate. So that might not be a life worth living, you might seem. But there are going to be emotional trigger foods sometimes that will cause overeating or binging or other kind of nutritional faulty behaviors. So if you have an emotional trigger food, that would be something you want to eliminate or highly, highly restrict and monitor. So there are cases where such and such food might actually be bad for you. So if it's a medical condition or a trigger food, I'm sure there's other examples, but those are 2 big ones. But in general, any food can be included into a diet. Depending on how calorically dense it is, would depend on how much of it you can have and how frequently you can have that. So if you want to have a cheesecake every day for lunch, it's probably not the best option. And it's going to really restrict how many calories you can eat the rest of the day, and or prevent you from eating any calories, because there's a lot of calories in cheesecake. So any food can be included if you include the right amount of it and kind of pay attention to the effect it has on your day. So I've seen people who are trying to make weight for a competition, and this would be maybe more strength than aesthetics, because in aesthetics, exactly what you eat matters, 100%. Whereas if you're just trying to match a scale number, so if you're a powerlifter trying to lose 10 pounds, sometimes you'll see people do if it fits your macros, and they're like, I had this morning, I had a pastry and some coffee, and then I just didn't eat anything until supper. That's not good. That was not a smart way to handle your calories. So they're going to reach the number that they wanted on the scale, but they're going to be moody as hell. They're going to have no energy. Their performance is going to be absolute crap during their workouts. And nothing outside of that scale going well, nothing else is really going to go well. So it's not the right way to handle food. Whereas if you want to try to get to a competition and you're trying to lose weight, having a little bit, like having a Hershey's Kiss, isn't going to kill you, and it gives you a sense of chocolate. So as long as that doesn't turn into a trigger food for you, that would be fine. You can include that. So you think of fruit also, if you're trying to lose weight, fruit is okay. You can include fruit in a weight loss diet. You just have to make sure that it doesn't lead to other foods. So sometimes the sugar in fruit does cause triggers for cravings, depending on how severe someone's diet is, how calorically restricted they are. So a better way of saying the statement of such and such food is bad for you is to just say, controlling your caloric intake allows you to include some fun foods in your diet without sacrificing results. So as long as you're watching your calories, go listen to podcast number 41. It talks about the 5 main components of diets and what are the most important and where you should focus your energy. Number 1 is calories. So you have to control your calories. So if today I feel like swapping out some of my calories of potatoes for cheesecake, okay, I can do that. It's probably not something I should do on a regular basis. And as long as I'm checking my total caloric intake for the day and I'm still on point, I'll still have that weight loss effect that I would want for the day. Now, like we said, if you make that choice on a consistent basis, having a diet of, say, 2,000 calories of cheesecake a day versus 2,000 calories of healthy, good food, both diets might lead to the same amount of weight loss, but you're going to have horrible, horrible time adhering to a one that's full of bad food. Because like we said, there's going to be huge energy spikes and drop-offs. You're going to have big blood sugar swings. You're going to have mood swings throughout the day. You're going to have energy swings throughout the day. You're going to have hard cravings you'll have to fight off. So your performance and your feel for the day is going to be really bad. So you're just going to feel like you want to go to bed all day because you're eating junky, horrible food and your body's kind of like having a hard time processing all that stuff. So we want to, as long as we control our caloric intake, we can add in some fun foods from time to time without losing results. So rather than thinking such and such food is bad for you and it should be completely eliminated, that's not true. You can add that in. You just have to add it in controlled amounts and controlled timing and frequency. Okay? So, hopefully that gave you just a little bit of an insight into why memorizing things is not the best way, whereas if you learn the concept or the reasoning for that rule, it's much, much better. So, when you invest your time into listening to these podcasts, I do hope that out of each podcast you come away with a concept, an educational concept that you feel like you can apply to your life. I don't think I would be doing you guys a good service if I just gave you things to memorize and then say, okay, I'm always going to do this. That's not really the approach we want here. We want to learn the reasoning why we do or don't do things, and then we want to learn how to apply that to our life. So if there are, 100 people listening to this podcast, I would hope that all 100 of you would learn something that applies to each of your lives. Now that is going to be impossible to do if we just do memorized facts. Because out of 100 people, you're all different, you're all living different lifestyles, you all have different goals, you all have different needs, you have different bodies. So hopefully I can teach you guys concepts that you can apply specific to you. And that way you can help 100 people. Rather than just giving you guys stuff to memorize or kind of like black and white stuff that sometimes works but sometimes doesn't and then leaves you confused when it doesn't. Cool. So, as much as you can when you're getting nutrition advice, find out the reason why. So don't just listen to things and then learn a memorized fact. So try to figure out why. Try to learn a little bit of the science behind it or the reasoning behind it, and that way you can better apply it to your life in all situations you find yourself in. Cool. Okay. So hopefully this information was helpful. If you like this type of information, you can find more from us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Brutal Iron Gym. Also, if you like the podcast, please share it with your family and friends. So the more people you help, the happier the world will be. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, like we said, if you liked the idea of me going through these kind of myths and kind of explaining when they're right or wrong, shoot me one in an email and let me know, and I'll kind of use a podcast for it. So the point of the podcast is that this stuff is supposed to be helpful for you. It's supposed to benefit your life and be something that you want to learn about, and something that once you learn about, it makes an awesome, huge, amazing, wonderful, happy difference in your life. So if there's anything you do want to learn about, let us know. Okay? Our email is brutalironGym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.